painful lesson you learned too late?
When I was 19, I was the kind of person who always put myself first, not in the sense of healthy boundaries, but in the sense of if it's convenient for me, then it's right. I often cancelled plans at the last moment, could ignore messages, sometimes just disappeared when I didn't feel like talking, and I always found an explanation for it. I don't owe anyone anything. This is my life. Normal people will understand. And for a while, it even worked. Friends wrote, invited, people tried to keep in touch, and I replied when it was convenient, ignored when it wasn't. I thought it was normal, that real people would stay no matter what. But then little things started to disappear. First, they stopped inviting me just because. Then to something more important. Then not at all. I didn't notice it right away, because it all happened slowly. But one Friday evening, I sat at home and realized no one had written to me. No one. I opened social media and saw people hanging out together, the same people I used to spend time with, and then I was hit by a strange feeling. Not resentment, but confusion. Why didn't they write? I even wanted to text someone first, but suddenly realized I didn't know what to say, because the last times it was me who ignored. I was busy. I showed that I didn't really need it, and then a very simple but painful truth hit me. People stopped knocking on doors that are always closed. For a long time I thought I was forgotten. But then I realized they just stopped trying to hold on to me, and that was a lesson I learned too late. Because I couldn't bring those relationships back anymore.
When I was 18, I was the kind of person who always chose others. I adapted, listened, supported, remembered the little things that mattered to people. I thought that if I was the right one, then I would be chosen in return. I had a relationship that started very well. He said the right words, made beautiful gestures, and I truly believed it was something serious, but over time small moments appeared that I ignored. He could not reply when it mattered to me, cancel a meeting without explanation, choose friends or his own business. And it was fine. I explained it to myself simply. He's just busy. He's going through a hard time. I need to be patient. And every time he came back with attention and warmth, I forgot all those moments as if nothing had happened. And it became a system. He came and went when it was convenient for him. And I stayed steady. And you know what hurt the most? I didn't even notice that it wasn't love. It was waiting. It was constant maybe this time. One day I sat waiting for his message. It was already late. He had promised to write. I checked my phone every few minutes. And at some point I opened social media and saw him online. But not in our chat. He was calmly talking to others, posting stories, living his life. And in that moment something broke, not suddenly, but very quietly. I realized this wasn't the first time, that it kept repeating, that every time there was a choice, he didn't choose me. And the worst part, I allowed it. I stayed, I explained, I waited, and that lesson hit very hard. If someone said regularly doesn't choose you, that is their choice. You just don't want to accept it for a long time.
I ruined my relationship and realized it too late. I was 22, she was 21. We were together almost 3 years. She was always there, supported me, endured my problems, never complained. And I got so used to her love that I started taking it for granted. Over time, I became cold, replied dryly, always busy, though I was just sitting in Discord. She asked what was wrong, and I only said, "You're overthinking." The worst part? I started seeking attention from other girls, likes, flirting, late-night chats. I told myself, it's not cheating. One day, she saw the messages on my phone. Nothing too extreme, but enough to understand I had stopped respecting our relationship. I still remember her look. Not anger, not even tears, just disappointment. She quietly said, "I've been fighting for us alone, haven't I?" And instead of apologizing, I started justifying myself. A week later, we broke up. At first, I pretended I didn't care, But one evening, I opened our chat and realized there was no one left I could write something real to. Months later, I accidentally saw her with another guy, and the worst part, she laughed the same way she used to with me. And then I understood. People don't leave because of one big mistake. They leave because of hundreds of small moments when you make them feel unnecessary.
When I was 19, I fell in love with someone everyone around me called complicated. People even told me directly, "Don't get involved, you won't be able to handle him." But to me, it sounded like a challenge. I thought they just didn't understand him the way I did. He opened up to me, shared his problems, his past, and I felt special, like I was the one who could stay when others walked away. At first, it felt like real closeness. I listened, supported, stood by him in hard moments. And it even gave me a sense of purpose, like I was doing something important. But over time I noticed it was one-sided. He felt lighter. But I didn't. His problems didn't disappear. They just shifted onto me. His mood dictated my day. His crises became my responsibility. And I kept losing myself. But I couldn't stop. Because in my head there was one thought. If I leave now, it means everyone was right. So I stayed. A little longer. Another chance, one more try to understand, and one day I was sitting, listening to him talk about his problems again, and suddenly realized I felt nothing, no compassion, no warmth, nothing, just emptiness. And that was scarier than any fight, because I understood I had burned out me so much that I no longer cared, and that lesson hit hard. You cannot save someone who doesn't want to change, but you can lose yourself trying to do it.
When I was 17, I was terribly ashamed of my family. Now it even hurts to remember. But back then, I thought poverty was something shameful. At school, everyone wanted to look cool. New phones, branded clothes, expensive sneakers. And I wore my older brother's old jacket and a phone with a cracked screen. Mom worked as a shop assistant almost without days off. Dad, after a back injury, could no longer work properly, so he took odd jobs wherever he could. They really tried, but in my head, it didn't matter. I only saw what we didn't have. I was constantly angry, especially at Mom. She asked how I was, I answered rudely. She asked to spend time with her, I said I was busy. She brought me small gifts, and I looked at them with irritation because they were not the right ones. I remember once she gave me sneakers for my birthday. They were cheap and clearly not what I wanted. I didn't even thank her properly. I just said, "Are you serious? No one wears these anymore." I still remember her face at that moment. She just quietly said, "I tried," and I left slamming the door. A few years later, I moved to another city. We rarely talked. I lived my life, built a career, tried to escape that past, and somehow thought I was doing everything right. Then Mom got sick. At first, it seemed like nothing serious. Fatigue, blood pressure problems, but it got much worse. I came home after a long break and for the first time really looked at her. She looked exhausted, older, like life had drained her. And suddenly I started noticing things I hadn't before. Her worn hands, the old jacket she wore for years so she could buy me something, the empty fridge at the end of the month, though as a child I was never hungry. I realized that all my life these people gave me literally everything they had, and I looked at them with shame, as if they weren't good enough. One evening, I accidentally found a box with old receipts and notes. There were Mom's records where she counted money to buy me school clothes, pay for a trip, save for a laptop, and next to some sums were notes like, "Don't buy a jacket for myself," "Postpone dental treatment," the main thing, that he has it. I sat on the floor and cried like a child, because only then did I realize the scale of her love. The most painful part? I never managed to properly apologize. Mom died a year later, and now I'm still haunted by the thought of how much warmth I didn't give her because I was too blind and proud. The painful lesson I learned too late. Very often, we are ashamed of the very people who sacrifice the most for us, and when we finally realize it, there is no time left to bring it back.
When I was 19, I moved to another city to study. For everyone, it looked like the start of a new life. Big university, new acquaintances, freedom. But honestly, I was terribly lonely. I didn't show it to anyone. At home, everyone thought I was doing great. I posted photos from cafes, laughed on calls, told them how much I liked my new life. In reality, I spent most evenings alone in a small rented room, just watching series so I wouldn't hear the silence. In the dorm, everyone quickly found their groups, but I always felt not enough, not interesting enough, not pretty enough, not confident enough. Because of that, I constantly tried to adapt to others. If someone liked certain music, I pretended I loved it too. If someone joked harshly, I laughed even when it hurt. I was afraid that if I showed my real self, I'd be left alone. That's how I ended up in a group of people who never really respected me, but I didn't see it then. I thought it was better than being alone. At first, it seemed fine. We hung out, drank, partied at night, but very quickly I became convenient for them. If someone needed money, they asked me. If someone needed to talk at night, they called me. But when I felt bad, suddenly everyone was busy. I remember one evening especially clearly. My grandmother had died. I sat in the dorm kitchen crying because I couldn't even go home for the funeral. I had no money for a ticket. I wrote in our group chat just because I wanted someone to be there. No one replied. An hour later, I saw their Instagram stories. They were all at a bar together. And you know what was worst? I still kept talking to them after that, because the thought of being completely alone scared me more than humiliation. Years passed like that. I was always around people and always felt like an outsider. I spent money, time, energy on those who didn't even notice when I was gone. And all that time, I convinced myself that this was friendship. The turning point came by accident. I got very sick, fever near 40, awful condition. I barely got up for days. And you know who came? No one. People I spent almost every day with didn't even write properly. One girl replied something like, "Oh, wow, get well soon." And that was it. I lay alone in a dark room, and suddenly life felt clear. I had spent years trying to earn a place among people who didn't care about me at all. And the most painful part, it wasn't about them. It was about me, because I agreed to it. I taught people they could treat me that way. I stayed where I wasn't valued just to avoid being alone. After that, I almost completely changed my circle. The first months were awful. I really was alone. No noise, no groups, no constant messages. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange peace. I no longer had to humiliate myself for someone to temporarily give me a sense of belonging. Now I have very few close people, but each of them is real. And the lesson I learned too late is this: loneliness is not the scariest thing. The scariest thing is spending years among people who make you invisible and convincing yourself it's normal.
My father worked as a truck driver all his life. He was one of those people who almost never talked about feelings. As a child, I thought he was cold. He rarely praised me, almost never hugged me, was constantly on the road. I wanted his attention badly, but instead I always heard criticism. You could do better. Don't be weak. Men don't behave like that. I grew up feeling I wasn't good enough for him, and over time, that resentment only grew. When I became a teenager, we constantly argued. I deliberately did everything against him. I wanted at least some reaction, even a negative one. Mom always said, he just doesn't know how to show love. But that only annoyed me because I didn't need explanations. I needed a father. When I was 22, I moved away and almost stopped talking to him. We could go months without calling. If Mom asked me to visit, I found reasons not to. Inside me lived a stubborn thought: let him be the first to try to fix things. But he didn't try, and neither did I. Years passed, and I got so used to the distance that it became normal. One evening, Mom called me. I immediately knew from her voice something had happened. My father had a stroke. I barely remember the road to the hospital. My head was full of noise. I kept repeating to myself that everything would be fine, that we would still talk, that there was still time. But there was almost no time left. He survived, but could no longer speak properly. Part of his body was paralyzed. And when I first entered the ward, he just looked at me and cried. It was the first time in my life I saw my father cry. I sat next to him and suddenly realized how much we both had ruined for years because of pride, silence, inability to say simple things in time. Later, Mom told me something I never knew. It turned out my father constantly talked about me when he was on the road, showed my photos to other drivers, bragged about my work, kept all my childhood certificates in a separate box. I listened, feeling torn apart inside, because all my life I was sure he didn't care, but he was just someone who didn't know how to love properly. The worst part, we realized it too late. Now I visit him often. We can sit for hours in silence, and that silence is heavier than any words we didn't say to each other before. The painful lesson I learned too late. Sometimes people love you as much as they are able to, and if you wait for the perfect form of love, you can lose someone without ever realizing they loved you all along.
I had a best friend from childhood. We literally grew up together. She knew everything about me, my fears, insecurities, dreams. We talked every day, saw each other constantly, planned the future as if we would always be together. Then came my success period. Good job, new acquaintances, parties, people higher level, and I started to change, but not in a good way. I began to feel like she was holding me back. She stayed simple, calm, homely, and I wanted to be part of another world, more beautiful, expensive, prestigious. I started replying less, canceling meetings, ignoring messages for days. But she still stayed, always. I remember one moment very clearly. She wrote me a long message saying she was struggling, depression, problems at home, panic attacks. And at that moment, I was sitting in a restaurant with my new company. I read the message and just put the phone aside because I didn't want to ruin my mood. I replied something dry hours later like, "Stay strong, it will be okay." And that was it. Now it's even scary to remember how cold I was. After some time, she almost stopped writing first. Our communication slowly died, but I didn't try to stop it. I thought it was normal. People just outgrow each other. Then I found out she ended up in a psychiatric hospital after a suicide attempt, and it hit me like a truck. I sat remembering all those moments when she was literally crying for help, and I was too busy with myself, my new life, my ego. I didn't go to her right away. I was ashamed, scared, didn't know what to say. When we met, she was very quiet, completely different. And you know what killed me most? She didn't blame me at all. She just said, "I really missed you." And in that moment, I realized how terrible a friend I had been. We still talk, but not like before. Some things can't be fully fixed. The painful lesson I learned too late. People rarely directly say they're not okay. Often, they just quietly hope you'll notice. And if you ignore it too many times, one day it may already be too late.
At school, I was the smart guy. Everyone expected a great future from. Teachers used me as an example. Relatives kept saying, "You'll go far." And I got so used to living with that label that I gradually became afraid of any failure, not mistakes, but of looking like someone who could make them. While others tried different things, took risks, sometimes failed, I chose only what I was sure of. If there was a chance not to be the best, I simply didn't start. From the outside, it looked like success. In reality, it was fear. I dreamed of doing music since childhood. I was actually good at it. I could sit nights with a guitar, write my own stuff, record demos on an old laptop. But I almost never showed it to anyone because in my head, there was always the thought, what if it's not good enough? So I took the normal path. Good university, serious profession, stability. Everyone was satisfied, except me. In the first year, I still tried to combine studying with music, but gradually there was less time, then less energy, then less desire. Because when you constantly live a life you don't love, everything inside you starts to fade. I remember the moment when a friend invited me to perform with him in a small bar, just for people, nothing big. And I refused, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid to mess up, afraid people wouldn't like it, afraid to look silly. A few years later, that friend was already doing small tours, and I was sitting in a stuffy office convincing myself that adult life is like this for everyone. But the worst part wasn't even that. The worst was that I started envying everyone who at least tried, even those who failed, because they had what I didn't: courage. One evening, I was coming back from work very late. Subway, headphones, total exhaustion. And at one station, a street musician was playing. Just an ordinary guy, nothing special. People barely paid attention, but he looked alive. And it hit me, because I suddenly realized I had lived for years just to avoid losing. And because of that, I had never truly tried to win. At that moment, I was almost 30, and that realization was terrible. I started playing again, first at home, then posting something anonymously, then small performances. But you know what's hardest? Doing it after years of fear, after years of convincing yourself to stay silent. Sometimes I think about how much time I lost, how many opportunities I buried before they even appeared, the painful lesson I learned too late. Fear of failure can ruin life much more than failure itself, because when you constantly avoid risk, one day you realize you didn't live your life, only its safe version.